Welcome to the Voices of War, a podcast with a simple vision to bring to life the true costs of war through the voices of those who've lived it. I'm your host Maz, and I hope you enjoy this episode. My guests today are Will Yates and Joe McCleary. Will is a freelance writer, documentary producer, and investigative researcher for television, film, and radio, with more than 18 years' experience producing factual programming for outlets such as the National Geographic, BBC, and the History Channel. Throughout his career, he has spent many years investigating the war in Iraq and recently published a book titled War Trials: Investigation of a Soldier and the Trauma of Iraq. The book is a true account of Joe's time serving in Iraq as a British soldier in 2003 and his role in the tragic death of a 15-year-old Iraqi boy, which led to multiple war crimes court cases, of which he was ultimately cleared. Throughout the ordeal, Joe battled with severe mental health issues and has tried to take his own life numerous times. This book is the first time that a British soldier accused of war crimes in Iraq has opened up in an unguarded and in-depth manner. As a result, the book is a deeply moving account of the true nature of war and explores themes of military conduct and responsibilities of those serving in war zones. Will and Joe join me today to discuss the book as well as to dive deeper into some of the issues Joe's war experience has brought to light. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining me.
Yep, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, thanks. Good to chat.
So, Will, maybe we'll start with you. I recently finished the book and found it absolutely captivating, mate. So, firstly, congratulations. It's an excellent read, and I particularly liked how you brought. And it feels awkward saying this in front of you, Joe, but how you brought Joe's emotions through the pages and the torment that he went through. But maybe I can ask you for some context for those who are yet to read the book, which I'll provide a link to anyway in the show notes. But maybe can you give us a quick synopsis of the story and the background of the book?
Yeah, absolutely. So the book, War Trials, Investigation of a Soldier and the Trauma of Iraq, was a book that came out of my meetings with Joe. And that was 5 years ago now. I first met Joe as part of a TV documentary development that I was involved in, developing a possible documentary about British soldiers and the rules of war, which was even back then a contentious issue because of the investigations that were underway. There was a government body, IHAT, the Iraq Historical Allegations Team, that were investigating British soldiers over incidents and reports that they'd received over conduct in both Afghanistan and in Iraq. I ended up, during the research and development phase for this possible documentary, meeting a bunch of different soldiers who had served in both theatres. I met with Joe, and we sat down for 2.5 hours, and Joe's story just deeply impacted me. Really, it kind of captivated me. What he had been through, his experiences resonated with me growing up in a small town just outside Liverpool. The path that led him to sign up with the army, the training, his time actually in Iraq, and then what happened subsequently. And that is basically the story of the book. The documentary, as you know, sometimes tends to happen, didn't go forward, partly because the contentious issue meant that the government organization wouldn't give us access to what they were doing. They kind of shut it up, and they wouldn't allow us to kind of interview them, the IHAT team, or talk to their personnel about what they were doing. And that would have needed to have been a core component of covering it in a full manner that we would need to do. But Joe's story stayed with me. And it's probably about a year later, about summer 2017, I just gave Joe a call and said, "Here, mate, remember we met last year, and you're your story it's stayed with me, and want to see if I can do something with it and explore writing a book about your experiences. And then we met numerous times after that. He was very kind, generous with his time and sharing, and the result of that was the book, which was published recently.
Yeah, and as I said, a great read, and a very captivating read in the sense that it brought the reality of what soldiers on the ground actually experience. But there was one particular incident, and maybe I can ask you, Joe, if it's not too raw for you, but there's one particular incident that the entire book revolves around, and that you ultimately, I guess, were answering for across a number of different investigations and one major court-martial for war crimes, correct?
Yeah, correct.
Can you just give us a quick rundown of what the incident was? Just for context for our listeners.
Yeah, you mean the incident of the boy?
Yes, that's right. Of Ahmed Jabbar Karim. Yeah.
Yeah. Firstly, it was just a tragic accident. It's just got a call on the day over the radio that there was shots fired in the hospital grounds. We sort of guarded this hospital, Basra General Hospital. Everyone's tired. We're so close to going home. We're peacekeeping at this point. Shots fired, so we go out on patrol, and then we come across looters that were looting the hospital. Detains the looters, and they sort of got the crowd started gathering. All of the local people just starts gathering around. I never forget it. And they were shouting, Ali Baba, Ali Baba, trying to control the crowd, but the crowd's getting bigger, and they're throwing bricks at these people. They're not small stones, and they were in like some type of puddle. But they were throwing bricks at them, and in the end, the bricks.
This is at the looters, right? Just to Ali Baba, meaning thief. Thief. Yeah.
So we got to call in the warrior to come round to collect them, to bring them to the front of the hospital. So as the warrior comes and collects us, it's just myself, and then the other lads. And then, my sergeant says to me, mount up. We did taking the looters, and I just looks up and just says, oh, okay. So I get in the back with myself and another one with these 4 detainees, and we drive for 15 minutes. Now, I have no idea where I'm going, none whatsoever. Yourself, you've been in the back of an armoured vehicle. That one piece of glass, which is like 7 inches thick, is scratched. You can't see it. After 15 minutes, the door opens on the side of the side of a river, which is Bridge 4. And as the doors open and we let the Iraqis out, we cut the tires, and obviously they probably think I'm going to get shot here, but that wasn't the case. My rifle's over my shoulder, and I just let them go. We went to the water's edge and swam off to the pillow. But Ahmed was at the front. The more we approached him, he obviously thought he was pushed himself back, and then we didn't know whether he was struggling or not. And then I turned round and sees the signal to mount up from my sergeant, which is a round circle, and then that, which means double time. Now, I'd left 4 lads back in the hospital with no armoured vehicle, and, obviously missing 4 of us. I had to make that choice on the ground, and I thought they're getting attacked. So then I said to the boys, right, mount up. I'm thinking he'd just wash to the side there or just climb up and get out, and then he'd walk home. So we'd gone back into the vehicle, mounted up, got back, and as I've come out the vehicle, I've looked, and the lads are fine, and it was pretty much, I was just a tragic accident. It was never, there was reports of us throwing bricks at them. It didn't happen. This was just all falsified statements. Just doing, like when they were asked in court about it, he just said, well, I'm here for compensation. He wasn't here about what happened. He was just there for compensation.
Yeah. And we'll definitely get to that part, because I think that's part of a much bigger picture.
I understand. Sometimes I just ramble on a bit.
No, not at all. No. I mean, mate, I'm just sorry that you had to go through that experience. I mean, that must be.
It's just, I was 20 years of age, 21 maybe. And if I could take that moment back, I'd take it back. I've suffered massively over it.
Yeah.
And my heart bleeds for that family. No matter who you are, doesn't matter whether you come from Iraq, whether you come from Britain, whether you come from Australia, a father's loss of a son is humongous. You know what I mean? And I am so sorry that I managed to save him. I wish I did.
No.
Do you know what I mean? But
no.
It was just a massive accident.
And Will, was this the what captured you about the story? Was the tragedy of it that then followed up with, I guess, Joe being dragged through the courts to, relive that decision, that moment, that image that he just described to us. Was that what captured you about the story?
Yeah, I think to some large extent, what grasped me about the story and compelled me to write it was really the theme of the trauma of war and how widespread it actually is. Joe just used the phrase, his heart bleeds for the family of the boy that tragically drowned. And at the same time, I could totally understand where Joe was coming from, and thinking of the many victims of war, whether they're people who are displaced or those that are killed or their family members, but then also the soldiers themselves and the scars that they receive, whether they're physically wounded or, like so many, scarred emotionally and mentally by what they've witnessed. And just kind of feeling that compassion for Joe and the struggle that he had and that his family, as a knock-on effect, had been through in trying to help him through that. And I was just really fixated on trying to convey as much as I could through the written word the trauma of war and how wide the concentric circles of that spread out to impact so many people.
Yeah, and I give Joe, I give you full credit for being so vulnerable to speak so freely for the book as well, because I think that's a part of, while your story is so prominent, it became so public. I think there are many soldiers who suffer in silence. Your story was aired for the world to see, but the fact that you actually were brave enough to face the media and then subsequently Will to write the book in such a way that showed the human person behind the story. Because I think it wasn't just, and if I'm just, and I've just read the book, so it's all still relatively fresh in my mind, but this was right. I think might have been the last day of your tour, but you've had a pretty rough tour because this was 2003, right? Yeah. The beginning of the war, right?
Yeah.
The invasion.
What people don't realize. What people don't realize is, we sometimes didn't sleep for 2 days. Especially at the start. I remember standing there at one point on guard and just standing up and falling asleep. Like I could have literally fell straight over. And, you had to push your body to the limit every day. The heat, the climate, the constant, you didn't know which one was the enemy and which one wasn't. You were constantly on pins. We lost Molly and Muzz, two great lads, two young soldiers, one with a family and one had a family. And, they were great lads. And another 4 were shot down, managed to survive. And what people don't realise is I remember that night, like it was, tomorrow. And you could hear people knowing that there was a man down, men down, multiple casualties. Everyone's trying to get back together. But what had happened is we were in all-round defence, and these mercenary soldiers were in the centre of it, under sheets of metal, and they lied there all day. So the minute the night fell, they just come up and open fire and kill Molly, kill Muzz, killed and injured multiple people. And that night, someone came in and covered us after the firefight. We couldn't even return fire. And when we got cover, I remember lying in a room, pitch black. It must have been 40 of us, just my platoon. And every man in there was crying. Every man shed a tear for them lads, because he was just like, and that was probably 3 days in. And we were like, wow, I'm not even coming home.
Yeah.
This is crazy. And that lasted like that from the tour, whether we went from aggressive to then peacekeeping and then to try and police it. It was just crazy and a lot of time we didn't really rest. You know, we were on ration packs. People don't realise. You know, people think like, oh, you know, we eat rations like, you know, we're not as good as the Americans, but we have like, for breakfast, we have beans and a burger. We have biscuits and paste for dinner. Yeah. And then later on, we'll have a chicken. And if you're lucky, there'll be a dumpling in it. You know, it just depends how lucky you draw. And at the end of that meal, there'll be a treacle pudding. No one likes treacle pudding. Do you know what I mean? But you'll stuff it in because you're just that hungry. You're that tired. Yeah. You know, the heat is just crazy. You know,
and that's something that people don't understand. I mean, even just the heat of Iraq, and we spoke offline before. I mean, and most of my audience will know I've spent about 8 months in Iraq, and the heat. And I was in Baghdad, not even Basra, where it gets even hotter. And you were in body armor, you know, all gunned up.
Body armor, helmet,
a lot. I mean, just that in itself is such an uncomfortable feeling. But that incident that you spoke about, where Molly and Muzz were killed, that struck me. And Will, again, congratulations to you on the way you depicted that, because you could really feel the terror within it. Because as you said, you were in all-round defense. Right, and in army speak, that basically means everybody's facing out, protecting protecting the circle. Right, the headquarters is generally in the middle. Everybody's facing out for any threats that are coming in. But all of a sudden, for you, the threat was in the middle and shooting up the middle. And unfortunately, that's where you lost two of your mates from the platoon. And then from there, I mean, you can't shoot anywhere because there's a risk of, you know, shooting your mates on the other side, right?
The night after that happened, the very next day, we were up and out. You know, people don't realise you can't just take a week out. You know, it's happened and it's happened. We know that's happened. And his headset, one of the headsets was missing. But it was only a headset where you can speak to each other, not, you know, like 100 metres radius. You just a little click and we can speak to each other. Now, that mercenary soldier had his headset and he was within 100 metres of us. And he said, you bastards, you will all die, you bastards. And it went dead in an Iraqi's voice, you know, in what I'm saying is in their accent.
Yeah.
And it sent shivers down my spine. And Sergeant Ferguson booted us all as we were lying on the ground. Who's messing around? Who's the prankster? It wasn't us. He had the headset. But it's a concrete jungle, you know. There's buildings everywhere. In that 100 metres, he could be anywhere. It's not like it's just a flat surface and we can spot him and then put the rounds towards him. You know, we searched that building. We searched every single one of them, couldn't find him. And it was just that one that haunts me, you know. And even then I was lying on the ground, 20 years of age, thinking, wow, I'm coming home from this. We had to write letters home to my parents to say, they advised us to say, if you want to write something to your family, you know, write a little letter home to say, you know, I might be coming home.
Will, have you done any military service yourself before?
I have not. No, I've not served in the military. And
he would have been a great soldier.
Great target.
Well, the reason I asked that is not to put you on the spot in any way, but I'm just, what led you down this path? Because this is quite a unique path that you've taken to explore these types of stories. You know, where's the link for you? What drew you towards these types of stories, which are quite traumatic to try and extrapolate and unpack and then tell the world? What motivated that?
There were a couple of motivations, I think, one of which was I'm interested in history, and I've done a lot of history programs, read a lot of history books. It's, you know, something that interests me anyway, and the history, what led to the war, the most recent major conflict that the UK, US, and Australia have been involved in. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount written on it. There's some titles, but not a wealth of material. And I think it's important that conversation continues to be had. So I kind of want to add to that conversation. But then also, I was familiar with the Iraq story, having done a documentary drama about 2 years after the Iraq War, about the suicide death of a British former weapons inspector, a guy called Dr. David Kelly. And I worked on that for about a year and a half or so, which is quite a long time in TV terms. But I attended the government inquiry that was into his death, the Hutton inquiry, met and spoke to a load of people who were involved in that. And, that was, really impactful project to be involved in, because it was not just looking into why a former British weapons inspector who then spoke to a journalist about his concerns of the government's suggestion that there were weapons of mass destruction, and his concerns about actually whether or not that was in overinflated evidence. But also just it was really kind of one of the first critical examinations of the war in Iraq.
And why is it important to tell these stories? Not just Joe's, but also about that. So the bigger picture about the war that you just mentioned, about even going to war, and then of course Joe's on top of that.
Yeah, it's important. Sadly, history, if you don't agree that it repeats itself, it at least comes in cycles, right? There's things that you can look back on and see, sadly, repeated mistakes being made. And, you can think, we try and live in the now, and, what's the value of looking at the past? Well, actually, it's going to affect what we do in today, and it's going to affect the future, because if we don't learn from our mistakes, we don't look back and recognize how the events, the fallout of the government sexing up a dossier about its accusations and its claims about Iraq, and using that to push forward a controversial case towards war in the Middle East, and then all the negative impact from that, then we're not going to learn from it when it happens next time. If we don't look at the experiences of strong, important stories like that of Joe's, who fought for his country and really kind of been neglected after the fact by those that he served, then what's going to stop it from happening again in the future? We've got to learn these lessons. And that was one of my key motivations.
Yeah, spot on. And I mean, to be honest with you, that's one of the key motivations of this podcast as well, is, and particularly in this Iraq war. I've just interviewed one of our prominent political scientists not long ago. And it's now basically discussed in the open that Australia went to Iraq purely for our alliance with the US. That's it. That's the bottom line. And we're hearing this now quite openly from some of our senior leaders. These are things that we need to, I guess, discuss, because soldiers are going forth believing in the mission, but when the mission is not what it's, when you're not fighting the war that you think you're fighting, that it all kind of gets a little bit jumbled up, and especially when you're not prepared for the war that you're going to fight. And maybe Joe, this is a question to you: how well were you prepared for the war that you went to fight?
Oh, it's people think, we train, and you'd think we would train for these things. And, listen, the British Army are fantastic. But we're penny pinchers. We went to go and fight in Basra, one of the hottest places in the world. And we went to Senalaga, where it was -20. We went and done an exercise there.
That's your pre-deployment. That's your pre-deployment training, right?
Deployment training, yeah, to go back in there. It was that bad. The tracks were cutting through the mud. It was like concrete, and it was snapping. And it was -20, and we had to get a steel pole, put the pin back in. We were shivering. It got called off in 4 days. One lad had frostbite, couldn't go and serve in Iraq. It was just embarrassing that the rifles kept locking up. Everything was done wrong. Prior to it, like, the fitness side of it was fantastic. We were okay. Everyone was good twice a day. But prior to it, the actual preparation for going in there was awful. We didn't have no pre-training. Everything with the army's like, we'll just cuff it. We'll just do it this way.
And we're bloody good at it. That's a downfall. We're bloody good at it. That's a That's why politicians who rely on the military so frequently, because they'll get the job done one way or another, right?
One way or the other. Listen, I know that the lads that were with me were my brothers. You know what I mean? And no matter what we did, and we did it to the best. We had poor food, poor equipment. We had one set of uniform for the whole of that tour. One set. I had no underpants. You could see the cheeks of my ass through it. You know what I mean? It just faded away. My knees were shot. It looked like I had ripped jeans on. My shoulders were ripped. We looked homeless. We looked like homeless people. But every day, without fail, we were up and we wouldn't let it deter us. When we were hungry, when we were tired, it didn't matter. We just stuck together, and we'd always get some joker in the pack. Yeah. Would bring the morale up. But we were not equipped at all. We had no night vision.
What about understanding the human terrain or the cultural context that you were deployed to? Did you have any idea of of really who the enemy was and who was, friendly, quote unquote?
No, we didn't. We did see some footage of chemicals being we did before we went out on a lot of training. I spoke to Will about it as well. A lot of training in respirators prior to going out there. So it was all like chemical warfare. And I think we focused a lot on that prior to going out. And it was quite frightening, if I'm honest. Thinking especially when you're given your pens to stick in your leg, and you're thinking, bloody, I ain't sticking that in my leg. It was quite frightening knowing that each pen's going to make you live for 15 minutes. So you got 3 pens, you got 45 minutes before you can get evac'd out. But we basically, it felt like that's what was going to happen no matter what went before we went out there. And it ended up being totally different. Yeah. Thank God there was no chemicals used, but that's what we trained for prior to it.
Yeah. And I guess we drank our own Kool-Aid in that sense, right? But Will, this was generally and I guess you've investigated a lot more about this on the bigger scale. Was this the general feel that you get for the rest of the soldiers deployed, or was this a unique experience, or what's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I found from talking almost, universally to the many soldiers in different different levels, that logistics, while understand that it's a massive part of the military effort. When it comes to Iraq, it was massively lacking. There were crates of ammo and defensive plates that should have gone in body armor that were lost on their way through the Red Sea to Iraq. There were boots that were melting because of the heat. I had one soldier tell me that the boots were in such degraded bad condition they ended up finding a huge stockpile in an Iraqi hangar of Iraqi soldiers' boots that they'd obviously just left behind and fled. So they're like, oh no, we'll use some of these boots for the lads. So you got British soldiers running around in Iraqi boots. It's almost farcical, and that was one of the things that greatly hampered the soldiers from hearing their stories, was just the logistical problems that they went through and experienced.
And then of course the mission set, I guess, as well. And I think again you bring this through really well, and something you mentioned just earlier as well. I mean, talk about the kind of 3-block war, right? I mean, on one hand you were fighting hardened. Some might say hardened enemy, at least in some instances. In another block, you were, delivering humanitarian aid. In another block, you were dealing with looters. Can you describe that a little bit, Joe, and what that meant for you as a 20, 21-year-old? How do you deal with all that?
That was one of the toughest things I had to deal with every day. Dealing with the locals. Every day, they were begging for water. It was a country that was in war. We went from that to the peacekeeping side of it, and to the aid. I remember a vehicle comes in with water. They were throwing babies at me, just young, brand new babies, and I had to catch this baby in my hand, and she was on the floor with her legs wrapped around me, screaming for water. But, you know, in the end, we had to pull the truck out because we were just getting overrun. We couldn't pull back. The only other way was to push him back, you know, like, was to get in the tank, because there was just hundreds, thousands of people turned up for this aid. And we were like, again, we were so unprepared for it. It was unbelievable. You know, seeing this baby in my arms, I was just a young lad, and I'm thinking, you know, you're that desperate. And people don't even realise, you know, we had to go to the toilet and they'd be hanging over the fence when you're on the toilet, screaming at you, Mister, water. And you think, oh, just let me go. Like, I had to dig a hole. It was just horrific. You know, like, it was just constant. No matter what, every day, every single day, it was just hard work. You know, the people were suffering. You know, there was nothing there for them. You know, and going from that and then into this policing role, you never knew which role you were doing. You know, if you're on quick response, whether you were, you know, we had set days in the end. And, you know, you go on quick response or you go out, and every day the same thing. You know, people were just desperate. You know what I mean? They were desperate for food, they were desperate for water. You know, and it was just pushed upon us, and it was tiring. It really was. And it was heartbreaking at the same time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's the other thing that we don't really talk about. I mean, it's obviously tough on the soldiers that are on the ground, having to face this, but, you know, we often forget the civilians who are seeing you as the only beacon of hope in what is absolute madness, and trying to find some way out to help you out, or help themselves. Sorry,
we get issued like 2 bottles of water per day. You know, most of the soldiers, including myself, like, we try and give a bottle away. You know, there's nothing worse than drinking hot water anyway. You know, you have to get it down your neck. But you try and give it to the people that needed it. And sometimes it was worse when you did that because it caused murder.
Oh.
You'd fight each other for it. And then you realise, unless you can pull someone aside and say, put it in your bag and hide it, they would kill each other for it, for that, just that drop of water, for that clean water. And it just, you'd sometimes sit on the bed of a night and just think, oh, you want to help. You really do. It's just nothing I can do.
Yeah.
Nothing I can do.
How quickly does one become desensitized to human suffering? Because that's one of the things it's one of the offshoots of war, right? Be seeing it all the time. And I just remembered my own time as a kid in Bosnia. You know, the first time close people died, you know, everybody cried. Within a month, you know, you'd hear someone died every day, basically. You'd basically just kind of say, yep, such is life. There, but for the grace of God, go, I think that's the phrase. But yeah, how did you find that? Did you find that you became desensitized over time?
You know what? That's just a great question, because, you know, when I look back at some of the stuff in Iraq and some of the incidents that I had to deal with, and I tell sometimes to my family, you know, these stories, and they're like, you really had to deal with that, Joe. But to me out there, you're right, I was desensitized because it just became normal. You know, seeing a dead body was just normal. Nothing, it wouldn't faze me, wouldn't do it, pick it up, put it in a bag, move it on. You know, things like that just became a job. It just became normal. And when I look back on it now, oh, breaks my heart. You know, like, I think to myself, oh, so sad. But I didn't know it. Even when I came home, I had no idea. Like, that was what you had to deal with, that job. You had to do this, you had to see that. It made no difference to me. Because you pretty much within 3 days out there, you know, you're desensitized. Everything is just normal. The sewage that runs down the road, the smell of raw sewage just becomes in your nostrils. You know, it just becomes normal. Standing in it, walking over it, you know, getting your rifle up every morning and having to, like, you could move 3 or 4 bodies in a day, maybe more. And you don't lose no sleep. You know, nothing. You'd have blood on your clothes, blood on your hands, be it a firefight, whatever it was. That was just the day. Maybe, you know, it was just like probably going to Tesco's or the Aldi, you know, like just go shopping for use. It's for them. You know, it was no different for me. You know what I mean? I think a lot of people, when they don't know about war, that is one of the key factors. You don't become, you become a part of it. You don't realise how much it's had an effect on you. And it's all building up inside. It just becomes normal. I remember seeing a container full of bodies. And I remember saying to my mum when I got home, oh, yeah, there was loads of them, Mum. They were just lying on top of each other. Just throw them in the container. And my mum was like, you sure, son? I was like, yeah, well, what's wrong with that? What do you want me to do to them? It was just, I had no emotion. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was just part of my job. And it shouldn't have been like that. I suppose that's just war, though.
Yeah, and I think that's what people don't understand. I mean, and I guess, Will, from your perspective, you've interviewed and spoken to also senior officers, but also politicians, if I gather, or at least people in government. How well is the image of war? What Joe just described, the sounds, the smells, the rawness, the desensitization of it, how well is that actually understood in the quote-unquote halls of power? In other words, those that are moving the chess pieces on the on the board.
That's a really good question. I don't think, from my experience, that the true cost of war is grasped in its great enormity by those that are making those key decisions, that are sending the young men and young women out to fight. I mean, there were, in 2003, there was about 46,000 British troops out in Iraq. And, just to hear the vivid description that Joe just gave of what the conditions were like, and so many young, and they were predominantly young, 19, 20, 21-year-old, most of them. The average age was, just really young people. I mean, for anyone at any age, these are just horrendous things for people to experience. I mean, even just to read about them, to hear them. I remember, after having sat down with Joe over coffee in Liverpool during the research process for a couple of hours, hearing his stories, and I'd just be walking away after we say goodbye, and I'd just be like almost like in a kind of like daze, because having been kind of saturated with hearing those experiences, and this is just me for 2 hours asking Joe and asking questions, hearing his stories. Joe and 40,000 plus other young men and women actually were there, and they experienced this, and it's soaked into their lives, permeated their lives of those experiences. So people at the top, they're the ones, like you said, moving the chess pieces. They can academically maybe comprehend, they can read the reports, the classified and the declassified reports of what's happening, and I know they've got to see things from all kind of perspectives, but I really don't think are grasping what it's doing to the young men and women who fight out there.
And of course, then that drives these types of missions without any clear kind of sense of purpose, or and translates into not well thought out conflicts. And now that you set that context, Joe, I just want to get back to this idea of looting, because this is where I guess the story takes the tragic turn.
Yeah.
You're now you're in Basra. There is lawlessness. Looting, to the uninformed ear, sounds like a couple of people breaking into a shop and taking a couple of TVs out, right? That's not what we're talking about here, are we?
No. I mean, they just took everything, like they looted, whether it be chairs.
And it was encouraged, right? It was not encouraged, but at least allowed from the top down. There was a political strategy behind it as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, did he took anything? Yeah, you see yourself, the donkeys, the carts, the old cars. He'd fill them with everything. You couldn't stop it. You'd grab one person and the other one stood behind you. It was just, he would just fend them for their lives. Each individual family, whoever home they had, with just every day was a survival mode just for them. You know, it was mass throughout the country. You know, they were stealing chairs to sit on, you know, firewood, you know, like anything they could do, anything to survive, food, you know. It was crazy. You couldn't look. You could look anywhere, and they were trying to steal. Or it wasn't really stealing, to be fair. They were just fending for their lives. That's what they were doing, you know. And you put you know, I'm a family man. If that was this happened to me, I would have done exactly the same, and so would everyone, because that's what you do. But trying to deal with it was just out of this world, you know.
And I think, Will, you've wrote about it in the book, or maybe, I'm not sure if I read this elsewhere, but it was almost a bit of a, you know, certainly it was the US policy, let looting occur because it was the kind of payback. Is that right? Did I read that in the book or elsewhere?
That's that was in the book. Actually, one of the chapter titles is "Let Them Loot," which is a quote that I took from someone who I interviewed, and he was describing the policy that the Americans had towards the Iraqis. Their view, the Americans, was they were going to bring democracy to the Middle East, to Iraq, and part of that democracy, the idea that they can choose their own destiny, was they're just going to take all the reins off, and if they chose to loot, let them loot. You know, they can readdress, you know, the balance of power, you know, existed between the Saddam, the Ba'ath Party, and, you know, between the Shiites and the Sunni, and you know, they had the freedom to just, you know, fight it out and rob and steal from each other. But it's, you know, it's up to them to kind of do what they wanted to do and
let the people enjoy their freedom, right? It was
exactly. It's, you know, even if that freedom is anarchy, and but it. You know, it was kind of really again, this is something I was told by multiple sources, that it was actually a, you know, political development that led to at least the British clamping down on the looters, even if the you know, the commanders weren't necessarily told how to do it. They were told that they needed to stop the looting.
Yeah, and I think that's can you just also just finish that off by saying why? Because there was, again, I think, at least through the words of your book, there are echoes of politics within it.
Indeed, it was politics that, as I understood it, that motivated the push to control the looters. In the early days of April, the Iraq National Museum was looted extensively, and like tens of thousands of priceless artifacts dating back to the Babylonian era, and, you know, just incredibly valuable pieces were just pillaged. And when that
all of our history, right? All of our history.
Yeah. And that's simply, you know, part of the amazing thing that drew me to the story is Iraq. It's amazingly rich tapestry of history, and when the news of the looting started to filter into particularly the British press, that became a big kind of political firestorm developing. I mean, there was already, particularly in the UK, I know, and in other parts of the world as well, but there had been, you know, a very vociferous campaign against the war. And in February, you know, just a month before the war began, there had been 1 million people marching on the streets of London against the war. So there was already that, you know, that being the context of, you know, the British public being a bit hesitant while they supported the troops. They were actually hesitant that the government were making this push to war. And then when the news came out that, you know, the Iraq's and our you know, global culture was being robbed and pillaged, the government said to the army commanders, okay, well, you need to put stop to the looting. You just need to stop. As if, you know, they could, you know, wave a magic wand and make things stop. And then the British commanders were frustrated at just being told to kind of prevent the looting, but not being told exactly how they could go about that. And that was really one of the the key failures, part of this wider spread lack of planning for the aftermath of the conflict that really, led to the tragedy that Joe was involved, sadly, in.
Yeah. And I guess when we, just again to put it into context, this is what's happening now in Basra. And Basra is a 1 million plus city, right? And there were 42,000 troops, not all frontline troops either, so a lot of logistics and everything else that are now being asked to try and manage that. Given the what but not the how, which again, military being military, that's, we work off that. Give me the intent. What is it? What is the intent that you want me to achieve? And I will go and find a solution for it. But none of you were trained for this, I suspect, Joe. And this is what then led to a number of creative methods that at face value, in a way, when I was reading it, it kind of makes sense, right? But then, of course, there's the tragic consequences that come with it. Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Do you mean like what we did to the looters, you mean?
Yeah.
The method where, yeah. A lot of the time in a lot of the places, they were like wetting them and driving them out and making them walk home, a 15-mile journey home. So they'd be soaking wet, and that was like a deterrent. If you get caught again, you're going to drive you 15 miles out, and you'll walk on your bare feet all the way home. And
it's shameful in that cultural context. The whole neighborhood, the whole world will know that you are,
because we did try and detain them inside the camp. But where do you detain? We had a cage on the side. If we bring them back into base, put them in there, but from there was nowhere to take them. What do you do? And within a day, that was scrapped because they were like, within 45 minutes, 4 vehicles turned up and the cage was full. And then we had to then think, well, what are we going to do with these people? We're going to have to feed them, water them, and obviously there's no punishment for them. Like, you just have to
police force. It's not like you can hand them over to the,
So, we can't send them in then and say, right, you'll be jailed and there's your home now. And I remember thinking, and I was guarding, and I was on the gate, and I was like, with these lads inside, and they were just sitting there talking to each other, and I think they were thinking, like, what's happening now? It was ridiculous. So there had to be some type of strategy to deter it, to stop it. And there was lots of other ways of doing it, and the punishments, but they were, you weren't gonna. There's nothing you couldn't strike them or hit them or anything like that, because they just come back at you. Eventually it had to be something like where you'd humiliate them. So everyone knew that lad walking back would be a looter, but it just didn't happen. There was so many different methods, some I don't even know about. Of trying to deter them. It was, I think, every day the top brasses would think of another plan.
Yeah,
and then it just filters on the ground, and then we just do it.
And I guess going back to that point about desensitized, the more you're desensitized to the suffering of people, and you've got to solve a problem, I'm absolutely certain that the methods of the kind of wedding method, I don't know for a fact, but I'm sure that wasn't the worst of the methods that some people came up with. I would have to imagine.
Yeah. I agree with that. And people have got to understand, people who have this view and never been to war or anything like that, one of the key factors is that it's just a massive factor. The desensitization is something that I didn't realize was even happening. It just became normal. The looting, the everyday stuff, it was always normal. And some of the stuff wasn't. You know what I mean? And it just becomes a part of war, unfortunately.
And was it, how difficult was it to maintain compassion time and time again for looters and for, in fact, even just for everyday people, Yeah.
I guarded the hospital, and my room where we stayed was below us was the children's hospital bit. And they had incubators. They didn't work, but it kept the flies off the children's face, and they were all sick. Listening to them parents cry overnight was just as bad as being in a firefight. The screams at 4 o'clock in the morning because the daughters or the sons died. Every morning I went there and I liaised with the nurse. I give all my water away to them. I tried to help as much as I can. If I could get anything, I would bring it in. We tried, but it was awful, and it became normal. Listening to them screams, you just wake up and you think, oh, God, you knew that as someone else. But them nurses came in every day, unpaid, and helped them. I mean, I remember at one situation in the hospital, there was a drunk male, and it's so frowned upon. You drink alcohol there, and it's so frowned upon. He was drunk, and he had a cut round the back of his leg. It was massive, and he was pouring a lot of blood. I managed to wrap his leg up, took his arm, and he refused to see him in the hospital. He just said, we'll let him die. And we said, look, we will not.
Because he was drunk, right? That's why, because he was smelling of alcohol. Yeah. So
the doctor, and so the rule was like the doctor will see him as long as I'm in the room with him and another soldier. And it was barbaric. There was no anaesthetic. There was no nothing. They put a pin through the hook through his leg, pulled the wire, and the skin wouldn't close because the gash was that big. The doctor had a cigarette in his mouth, and the ash was just falling off it. Pair of gloves on, and he had no sympathy for this fella. He wanted to inflict. It was more like a torture room than it was. And I was sitting there thinking, of all of that was going on, I kept thinking, why has the doctor got a cigarette in his mouth? He just didn't see it. And then towards the end, I thought, oh my God, this is like torturing him. And I said to the doctor, look, wind it up. No, we'll patch him up ourselves. In the end, he just bandaged his leg and then threw him out. But the doctor kicked him and said, get out. Because he was a drunk. He was drunk.
Yeah.
And
that's. I mean, these are. I'd imagine these are things that contributed in some way towards your mental well-being when you came back.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And I mean, we talked about the actual incident that you were then, having to face court-martial for, and I have no doubt that compounded, and I think it was post-traumatic stress disorder. You were diagnosed. Is that correct?
Yeah.
When did you first start, or what did that journey look like for you? Was it when you came back, or did you start kind of experiencing mental health challenges still in Basra? Or?
When I came home, we came home, we were in Germany, we sort of locked down for a week, instead of letting these lads out. You understand, all these lads want to do is drink, most of them. And I just sort of sat at home. And I got home to Liverpool. My mum had lit the street up with flags, Joe's back from Iraq, family and friends. And I didn't want to see anyone. It was so strange. And I remember seeing my nan and my granddad and all these people, these writing letters. Like, you understand, them letters in Iraq is priceless. I read my granddad's letter. I could hear him when he spoke, and he was fantastic. I'd read that letter every day. I'd have it in my map pocket. I'd pull it out when I was feeling down, and I'd read it. And when I got home, I remember drinking one beer, and I said to my mum, am I okay to go to bed? I just wanted to lie in my own bed. And it was just so noisy downstairs. I didn't like it. And then my mum had to say to everyone, do you mind leaving him? And I just went to bed, and I remember just crying my eyes out. Like, I was so happy to be home. And, I came downstairs with my mum, and I said, look, Mum, I'm really sorry. I know you went to a massive effort, but I don't want to do it. I don't want to. It just got too noisy, and people asking me ridiculous questions. Did you kill anyone? How many people did you kill? And it was just constant. Mostly younger lads asked that question, not my family. Like friends, because you don't understand. And I was just sitting there thinking, wow, just leave me alone. I've literally just got home. I just want to sit. And I think that's when it started to deteriorate. You're then back at home with laws and rules and police, and being at home, waking up overnight as well, sometimes thinking I was back there, going down the stairs to live in like the attic. And my bedroom was up the top stairs, and it had a big skylight in my room, and you could hear noise if it was open, like a bang outside, and anything like that. You'd hear one bang outside, and I'd be up, bang. And I'd be fretting, like, where am I? And I'd be so disorientated. And I think that's when I started to realise, something might be up. But the culture in my life that I've always brought up to is I wouldn't go and give you a hug. Suck it in, say nothing. You know, if I went to my sergeant, which I did say to him, I was struggling. When I went back to my battalion, I said to him, look, sergeant. He said to me, what the fuck do you want to hug? Go away. Because you mental health back then, stuff like that, it just wasn't. And especially as a man, you know, you didn't want to open up. So in the end, I just felt this massive weight, this just uncontrollable anxiety and feeling myself filling up all the time. And I was like I couldn't breathe. And then just every day, just putting it behind me, you know. And then, you know, with that, with a soldier becomes self-medication. We won't go to a doctor and talk about our feelings. We'll just drink. You know, we'll just open a beer, talk a load of rubbish with the boys and drink until I fall flat asleep. You know, that's how stupid it was. You know, back then, that's the way it was. Yeah. That's how you coped.
I mean, I'm hearing what you're saying back then, and it's certainly things have gotten better. But I think certainly both our countries are experiencing still a wave of mental health trauma that our veterans are dealing with for one reason or another. And I think, Will, was that part of the aim of this book as well, is to try and bring some of that into the kind of social discourse, the trauma that comes not only from obviously the trial that we'll touch on shortly, but also from the actual war, what people experience in war. It's something that somebody who hasn't seen it, a civilian, cannot contextualize. Like Joe was saying, you know, his mates will come, well, how many people did you kill? Because there's this counter narrative of war, this glorified idea of war, this, you know, go forth and serve, you know, for Queen and country. There is an honourable dimension to service that anybody who puts a uniform on is captivated by, but there is the cost of that we don't necessarily address in our social discourse. And I think your book does it really well. But I wonder if that was actually a name of it when you were kind of thinking. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, the bringing home the true long-term cost of war was one of my aims, and to get that conversation going with writing the book. There's an image that sticks with me that's not really to do with the book itself, but in some ways informed why I wanted to write it. I remember it's about American service personnel. I spent a lot of time, lived for almost a decade in the United States, and I was traveling within the US, and I remember sitting in the departure lounge. Plane arrived, a bunch of passengers were deplaning, and we were there waiting to kind of get off that plane where it had been emptied. And coming off the plane here in the States, there was a couple of service personnel in their uniforms with their big duffel bags over their shoulders. And as soon as they walked through off the plane and off the jetway into the departure lounge, everyone stood up and started applauding. And for me, you know, being brought up in the UK for 25 or so years of my life, that's not something that we would ever do. We respect our service personnel, and we value the contribution that they make, whether it's, you know, serving for our freedom overseas, or whether it's, you know, bagging up sandbags after there's been a flood, or, you know, any kind of context. We appreciate them. I think the British have a more nuanced perspective of you know, soldiers to some extent, whereas in the States there is this, you know, there is this veneration of soldiers, which, you know, which kind of comes from America's own development, but that also spilled over into the way in which I felt soldiering is perceived in the West, and the way it can be perhaps a draw for particularly young men. And they can be kind of drawn to perhaps a false promise of what joining the army and potentially fighting in a war could maybe bring them, without realizing, particularly today, the longer term impact of what war's going to do to them. And as you just said, as Joe just said, back then, even 18 years ago, there was not the attention on mental health, on soldiers' welfare that there is even today. And I was saying to you just offline that one of the senior members of the military, I remember something that he said when they were talking about charities like Help for Heroes that exist today to help soldiers, that the military's concern higher up with things like that was that the public would perceive soldiers as victims rather than victors. And with that idea at the top, if it filters down, no wonder that they weren't giving the soldiers the help when they were coming out of these awful situations that they needed.
And especially, in the face when you even asked for it. And that in itself, especially in those days, was a rarity, Joe. I'd imagine that wouldn't have been easy for you to... You must have been at the brink to put your hand up in that environment and then to be told what you want to hug. That I can't even imagine what that would have been like, because then it got a lot worse for you as well, right?
Yeah, it got well worse. What you understand is, getting rejected from your own side and so on like that. It was heartbreaking. I thought of his shoulder sign of weakness, and he just brushed past me. So then I just wanted to shut my doors even before, I don't want to let anybody in at this point, and then I was arrested. I went from that, it's just a whirlwind. I had these two men just knock on the door into my room. I was sitting on the end of my bed and he said, "Are you Joseph McCleary?" The guard from Joseph McCleary, and I said, and I looked. And to be fair, I honestly thought there was a rumour going around with soldiers saying that you had to have a TV licence for your TV. And if you get caught, you'll get like £800 fine. So I thought that these two gentlemen were from the TV licence. So he was like, "You Joseph McCleary?" I was like, "No, I'm not Joseph McCleary." He's like, "Yeah, no, I know you're Joseph McCleary." And I was like, "That's not my television."
I'm sorry, mate, but that's just...
it's funny. Yeah. But looking back on it now, this is. I honestly thought that these, because I was like, "Oh my God, I've been caught."
But I love that. It's such a classic soul. Nah, mate, that's not me. That's not me.
Yeah, it's not me.
That's brilliant.
We all look the same. We all got the same uniform on. But yeah, and then he said, "No, look," and then he arrested me on. He said he arrested me on murder and war crimes for the young lad who passed away. And I was just like, but this fella was so sure of himself. Like he stood tall, he was big, he was aggressive, and he couldn't wait to get me. Like, and I was like, just slow down. You got a mistake. There's got to be some, me sergeants flew through the door. We're trying to say to me, pushing them out. They got a lot of.
This is military police, right? That came now. That's
They were from the Special Investigation Bureau. It's like the CID of the army. The big tall suits they were in uniform. Just in everything. And in the end, he said, he'd turn around and to handcuff me, but my sergeant couldn't understand why. He was saying like, he's not aggressive. Just walk him down. Everything. And he was trying to reassure me, and there was a lot of hostility. Because you just don't walk into someone's company and just be like barge past your side, and you talk will have the respect to say, but he had no intention. He wanted it to erupt. He wanted to try and rile me, and to be honest, I wasn't riled. I was scared. I had so much emotions, and I probably was a little bit suffering as well from PTSD, and I had so much going on. And then I remember sitting in the back of the police car, the military police car. I was already in London, but they drove me into central London. Like it was probably only a 3 or 4 mile journey, but in London, if you'd been, that'd take you half an hour. There's traffic. And I remember sitting in the back of the car on my own, no one, with the 2 policemen. And I was so scared. And he was like, "You killed a kid, you little murderer." And I was like, "I didn't do it." He's like, "You little kiddie killer. You killed a kid." And I couldn't even wipe my hands because I was in cuffs, and I was just like, wow, this is unreal. So I just sort of tried to block it out. I didn't want to rise to it because I didn't want to say, like, I didn't want them to know I was angry or scared, because I wasn't. I didn't understand it truly. Mm. And then he said to me, he got me out of the car, the two big massive brown gates they were, and he opened up. He drove me into like this cobbled court. And as I got out the car, he got out the car and led away, his friend said to me in the lines of like, come on, mate, just tell him you did it. He was just a raghead. Don't worry about it. And I was like, I'm not going to do this with you. Are you even meant to be speaking to me? Like, I didn't kill anybody. I didn't do it. And then he sort of pushed me away, put me to the cell, and left me there. And I was like, all of this has just happened, and I've not even stolen Mars bar before. You know, I've got no criminal record. And like, I'm thinking, wow, what's going on? And he brought this a representation from the army to a brief to look after me. And I remember he come into the cell and he spoke to me, and he's like, he didn't understand it. He was like fresh out of school. You know, this lad had acne, and he's like some, and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like he's just a teenager, and I'm younger than me. And he's like, I'm here to represent you. I think what you should do is just go along with what they say. Oh, I said, look, I'm not really sure how all this works, but I know you're not for me. No offense, but you're wrong. And, you know, like, I even asked him, have you done this type of work before? He said, no. And that's who you've sent to represent me. You know, I was heartbroken.
But why was it? I mean, what? I don't know. Maybe Will, you've got something on this. I mean, why was? It strikes me as though the military police was unkind, but surely there's a reason for that lack of kindness. I mean, have you seen that elsewhere, or where were they coming from?
I mean, I actually spoke to one of the two arresting officers that were part of the RMP, the Royal Military Police, and was there and arrested Joe. Yeah, and I kind of came to my own conclusions, and this in no way is a defense of the way in which Joe was treated by the RMP, but my view, and we touched on this earlier, but that the military police were themselves scarred by their time serving in Iraq, because a lot of the RMP who end up investigating British soldiers after they returned from Iraq, those RMP themselves had served in Iraq. So they had witnessed firsthand some of the effects of the war themselves. So they had their own scars. So this is kind of what I mean about how the kind of concentric circles of, you know, the pain and trauma of war, it's so wide reaching. And you know what they say, hurt people, right? And so, you know, if you've got, you know, a military policeman who has, you know, got undiagnosed PTSD or diagnosed PTSD, they've got issues as a result of what they witnessed. And we know that like the RMP, there were 6 Royal Military policemen who were killed in June 2003 in Marj al-Kabar by a massive mob of Iraqis who had got angry at the British. We know that the RMP were photographing the corpses of dead Iraqis. They were attending to British soldiers who had been, you know, killed as they were driving around. They witnessed awful things as well. And, you know, they were passing on that. The conclusion I drew was that they were passing on that same trauma, that same hurt to the soldiers that they were investigating. And, you know, I've read elsewhere that in other investigations, there were RMP that were using quite harsh tactics when they were investigating. And that's I think one of the things that maybe drove that.
Yeah, makes you wonder, because I mean, ultimately we're all products of our environment, right? And what Joe suffered and what he's seen, what he witnessed, and also what he ended up being a part of is a product of that chaotic environment. And then you're now compounding that with RMP, the military police, who've also had their own trauma and potentially, carried that forward. Gentlemen, I'm conscious of the time, but the story is just too captivating. So if you guys are still happy to keep going, I've got a couple more questions, if that's all right. Because now we're getting to the trial, right? Because for you, Joe, I think is the real trauma is only starting, because you're now being forced to relive all of this, and ultimately, I think you attempt suicide 4 times throughout this entire episode, which goes over some length of time. It's not a matter of weeks we're talking. I mean, we're talking years here, right?
So what happened is I was arrested, and then I was released. I went back to my regiment. For about 4 days, I was soldiering on. Just couldn't. The anxiety was crippling me at this point of what was going to happen. I still had no idea. I was going to go to trial, and then it was like, well, you're going to be prosecuted. It's going to happen. So then the army sent me home. They were like, you can full pay, just go home and wait for your trial. That wait was 2 years. So when I went home, I self-medicate myself. I started drinking. I just didn't get in. The drink was heavier. The flashbacks were worse. I was having to wear gloves overnight to sleep because I was scratching myself. My mum then rung them on numerous occasions, like, my son's really suffering. Yeah, I'm sure he'll be fine. Nothing. And then...
Sorry, rang who? When you say them, rang who?
She rang the Ministry of Defence a few times and my regiment to tell him, that's not my son, that he's at home. And then it was just crippling me. And in the end, it was just getting drunk, and just enough so I could have the courage to do it. And then I took a massive overdose. And then my mum came in. My mum came in to find me and my brother, and took me to hospital, and he pumped my chest out and got me back around. And my brother shouting at me, you're selfish. What are you doing? But I couldn't live. I couldn't. And then they let me home, and then I'd done it again. And the second time, the hospital said, look, we're going to have to section you under the Mental Health Act. I didn't really understand what that meant. And then they said to me, we're going to lock you away. And my mum was crying, my brother was crying, and they put me in the civilian mental institute, locked the door behind me. I was so scared. And I was screaming to my mum, Mum, bring the army. Let them come and get me, Mum. Bring the army, please. And she was like, okay, son. And then they ended up sedating me because I got into a fight, because I was so scared. And then they put that much drugs in me. I was out for 2 days, and then I lied in the bed. And my brother came in, and I was like, is my mum in the army? They're like, they're not coming for you. My mum said, I'm sorry, son, they're not coming for you. They just said, let us know when he's out. It's like, oh, I'm still a part of the army. I'm still a soldier. You still pay me every month. Why isn't no one coming to get me out of this place? I was in there for 2 months nearly. And in the end, I had to open up to get out. And to talk about it, and to tell them. And even the doctor said to me, I'm so sorry, son, but I don't know how to deal with you. You're different than everybody I've got. I don't understand what you've been through. They tried to ring the military for them just to tear me away. Not one officer, not one sergeant, not one person ever came in there to see me to say, you know what, son, come here. You're one of ours. We're going to help you. Nothing.
Have you ever got to the bottom of that? Why? Why did no one?
I have asked that question so many times. Why didn't you come and get me? One of the main reasons behind everything, why I suffer from post-traumatic stress, is I don't understand why you wash your hands of me. You just go to work every day. I was a part of that team. I put my life on the line, and I was a goddamn good soldier. I was up with the best. I was doing my corporal's course. I was ready to be promoted. Everything was going in the right direction. And then the whole world come crashing down. And not one person from the military came to me. Not one. Not one welfare call. They had my mobile number. They had my home address. Not one letter. They never spoke to me in 2 years. And it kills me inside.
Mm. Have you spoken to anyone since then? Anyone from your original unit?
No, they won't care less, to be honest. I mean, they were nice. Like, there was listening to great people in there. I think if they understood, if the message was passed to them directly, maybe someone would have come. I don't know, but it drove me insane. Like I had hatred toward them. Like and then I went from like, it's okay. It must have been a mistake, to trying to say, well, I just forgive it. It's okay, Joe. It wasn't a mistake. I think it just got washed the hands. I'll just let them deal with it. I'm sure that he's fine with the NHS. I ended up going closer. I could open up to a man in there, one of the doctors, and he was like, he couldn't understand it. And he was like, I really wish someone from the military would come and get you, because I think they'd have a better understanding. And there was no healthy heroes, no nothing. And when I was released, it still didn't go away. The anxiety, the sleeping, the drinking. I used to get in fights and not fight back, thinking, let him hit me on the head. Maybe I'll wake up and one day it won't even be here anymore. I just wanted to die every day. And then he made me feel guilty. Then I questioned myself, and I'm like, I didn't do it. And I'd cry uncontrollably to my mum. Oh, Mum, make it stop. Come on, Mum, please make it stop. I couldn't sleep without taking some type of alcohol to knock me out. And that was just uncontrollable. And then when it actually got to the trial, a few weeks before we were ready to go, I'd gone from being this super confident man, stood my shoulders proud. You could throw anything at me and I would tackle it. You told me to get to the top of that, I'll get there and fight. Whatever you asked me to do, I would do. I became this crippled with anxiety, frightened. Something would bang, I'd jump. I wouldn't understand of how to control it. I just became scared all the time. And then mental health, and it just got worse and heavier, and the doctors could only do what they could do. I didn't like taking tablets because obviously I took an overdose, so I didn't really like taking them anymore. And when the child
how long after 2000, what year was all this happening? Because if you were in Iraq in 2003, when was all this, the court case?
The trial was, I think, 2006, Will 7.
Yeah, 2006, 15 years ago, actually.
And it was a military court-martial, right? Can you just give us some context behind that? Maybe Will as well, because I'd imagine you would have researched.
It was a general court-martial.
General court-martial, okay. Which is
it was like the highest level.
Highest, right.
The highest, yeah. There wasn't ever anything before that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So this is the highest one. I remember being inside this minibus driving up to the court, and there was just thousands of people taking pictures and cameras, and someone threw a towel over my head. And I was like, I don't want you to have nothing to be ashamed of. Why have you threw a towel over me? Take it off. I have nothing to be ashamed of. You couldn't have done any worse to me. Do you know what I mean? I have nothing to feel ashamed of, and I took it off. I mean, my uniform didn't fit me. My medals, someone had dropped them out of my room. All my uniform was destroyed because they just left me behind. So all my locker, my bed space, everything was all stolen, all my kit. And then they just left me behind.
Yeah. Is this story unique, Will? I mean, I know the book tells Joe's story, but is this a unique story?
I mean, I think in terms of its, uniqueness, sadly, it's not. There was one trial, and it's actually the same judge that was a few months before Joe's trial, but that was into some photographs that had been taken posing Iraqis in positions, and and of dead Iraqis. There was a court case relating to that, but otherwise, Joe's case was really the first kind of court-martial into conduct of soldiers during the actions in Iraq, and there, so it was kind of groundbreaking in some respects. But from everything that I've read from other soldiers that I've spoken to, they also went through similar traumatic difficulties, waiting for a trial. None that really kind of struck me as in terms of the depth of Joe's experiences. Obviously, I've got to know Joe, quite well, and he's very vivid in his descriptions, very, very visceral experiences that he had. But as we touched on earlier, there's a really high number of military suicides. There's soldiers that have been, just massively detrimentally impacted. Their lives have been ruined by accusations, by what they've seen, and their experiences in the conflict in the Middle East. And this is something that other soldiers sadly have had to go through, and the Ministry of Defence didn't step up, didn't recognise the help that they needed.
And I mean, Joe's case was obviously the first one, but it certainly wasn't the last. And I guess this is Australia is experiencing something very similar now, with some of our soldiers facing some pretty significant charges. Obviously, the Geneva Convention, rules of war, rules of engagement exist for a reason. But a continuous dilemma that I have is are these rules of engagement, the rules of war, something that we apply almost clinically in a place of peace, in a place of calm, without the context? Because I'd imagine there is I'm almost inclined to say that it's very difficult to fight a war without some sense of dehumanization, which then ultimately will lead to some, I don't want to call them atrocities, right, but some breaches of these rules. And I'd imagine Joe has probably seen a whole bunch of different things that people aren't answering for. And I certainly know that there is a lot of things out there that people had witnessed or had been a part of. Is this something you've come across, that these are also scars that people carry, that well, maybe this is a better question for you, Joe, that soldiers carry these scars of things that they ultimately ended up doing and they kind of feel bad for, but they're not answering for them because there's no one asking the question. But the nature of war is such that you are in an environment where you're going to do things that go outside of your own moral compass, outside of your own values, because, like you said before, you're in a place that you just don't understand.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, 100%. We've all got scars. Do you know what I mean? There'll be people out there who'll have done something out of there, and maybe it hasn't been investigated. I don't know, but it'll haunt them, and just war is in itself. It's just horrific. I mean, if people have done something that maybe not intentionally, I don't mean like this fella's gone out and killed someone and not known about it. I mean, like, he's done something to control something, like he maybe have hit someone or pushed them away, or he's had to get violent. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly.
To sort of protect his own safety in a way, to lay his authority on the ground. I've read stories out there, the Americans as well. People who have done that, like the stories I read about these American soldiers who tortured the Iraqis, or interrogated them in ways. That soldier will feel that way along the line, because he was being desensitized to that. That would have been it. Hoorah, as they say in America, like they would have been all up for it. And, and it's only now he probably got home and he's thinking, and it'll haunt him.
Holy shit.
You know what I mean? I didn't see any of that when I was there. I didn't see anything like really bad like that. No one was tortured where we were there. But the stories that I read were really bad. Yeah. And I can only imagine, what they go through now.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. And also all of that is, we can't look away. We can't look away as a civilized society. But what we have to do, I think, and this is where maybe I'll get both your opinions on. We have to be far more scrupulous when we send people to war, because war is ugly and things will go wrong. Things will happen 100%. that good people will go forth and will do bad things for a number of reasons, whether it's circumstantial, whether it's because of the pressure, whether it's because of fear, whether it's because three of their mates got blown up next to them and they just snapped and they've lost the sense of control. Whatever it is, things will happen. Yet we have this tendency to send people forth to go to war on a whim of I think, Will, you put it very eloquently at the start, right? I'm paraphrasing. It certainly wasn't. It was embellished evidence, to say the least, that we went for. What do you think? Who do we hold accountable for this?
For me, it'd have to be the MOD. In my case alone, the evidence was just woeful at best. It was just someone's willing to mine, and there was no evidence really of any wrongdoing.
And there was a witness, right? So maybe just talk about that in a bit, because you mentioned it before, but maybe just talk about that now in a bit more detail, because there was a witness that came and spoke, but really blew the case wide open.
Yeah. When I had to listen for weeks of how bad I am of a person, the prosecution has really gone for me. Don't know me. And then, this lad stands up and my barrister just turned around and said, could you just tell me what happened in a way? And he said, I'm here for compensation. I was promised money. Nothing for the welfare of anybody or anything. He just kept saying, he kept pointing at me and was saying it was him and him and him, to the other lads, and I want my money. And the translator just kept saying he's after his compensation. He was told, obviously, by his solicitor, which is now, obviously, he doesn't, he's been struck off the solicitor's role now, because obviously he was fabricating all the lies. And, it just blew it wide open. And I remember sitting there thinking, I've just tortured my life for 2 years. I have gone to the bottom, and I'm sat in hell, not wanting to live. And this is what you've said. It's just broke me. You're saying all this lies for wealth. You know what I mean? It was just crazy. Yeah. It broke me in half.
Absolutely. Again, I'm sorry that you had to go through that, man. That sounds absolutely horrifying. No. It's just it's I have the luxury of sitting, looking at this story through my eyes, not having seen it through yours, which I'm imagining is absolute horror. Particularly listening to yourself being described in such terms that you are a cold-hearted murderer, because it was the fabricated evidence was that you were throwing bricks at the young lad who unfortunately drowned. Well, I want to put you on the spot. Who do you think do we hold accountable for this? Where should the buck stop?
I think that there's plenty of blame in some respects. Obviously, the military, I think, failed in its duty of care towards Joe in terms of supporting him, in terms of providing for his mental health, and really just in terms of whether it's check-in calls, during the run-up to the trial, or whether it's just supporting him and his family during that period, right? I mean, he's still employed by the military, even if he wasn't there on a barracks. So there was a duty of care failure there. But then there's also, on the wider context, I think that there should be, and there really hasn't been, accountability towards the politicians that took the country to war, and they say they did it with integrity or upon the evidence that was presented to them at the time, but there was a lot of criticism at the time before the war about the evidence. There were concerns about the motivations for going to war. There were, around the world, there was up to 100 million people converging in 600 cities of 60 countries against the war. There was, the world was questioning this conflict, whether it was really necessary. And there's obviously governments change, politicians, there's a turnover there, but there's still accountability, and I think these questions still need to be asked.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. But the story has a somewhat of a silver lining, I guess, and again, it's easy for me to say that, not seeing it all through your eyes, Joe. But ultimately, you were cleared. All four of you were cleared, because there were four of you that were court-martialed.
Yeah.
The evidence was that there was no evidence, and it was a tragic accident, as you described at the start. What is your life like? How are you now? How have you? I mean, this is now, as you said, 15 years ago, as Will said 15 years ago. How have the last 15 years been for you? It's
been really tough. Yeah, it's been really tough. I still suffer PTSD. I still suffer, but I don't close the door on. I've got close people I can speak to about stuff, and didn't have it back then. But after the trial and the not guilty, it just never ended. Like, I was reinvestigated 4 further times after the trial. I remember them saying to me, not guilty, and the tears just didn't roll off my face. They burst out. She just burst out my eyes, and I could just remember shaking uncontrollably. Like, finally, I thought that was it. I can go and do my life. You know what I mean? He literally just said to me, right, you're out the army, sign there. It was awful, but I was happy to do that. I was just like, fine, just leave me alone. If I now look back on it, he just bullied me out. I lost my pension, I lost everything. I was just too young to even understand it. I was that suffering that bad. I didn't understand all that side of it, what I could have lost. I didn't even get a resettlement course. I give them 10 years of my life. By law, you have to give me some type of resettlement to go out and have a course. I didn't get it. Just never got nothing. So literally pushed me out the door, sign there you go, honourable discharge. And then they reinvestigated me. So as I'm trying to build my life up again, the IR team, they went to me, my wife's work, and was asking questions. Do I hit her, or do I, I remember that I was a security officer in a hospital, and one of the lads came up to me and said to me, look, this fella's coming around asking really strange questions about you, Joe. And I remember thinking, what? I already suffered that bad. And then it only came to light a little while later, that they were sending people out to investigate. What would you have got from that? It was just stupid. And then in 2000, I think it was 2016, he dragged me back to London. And I was going out with my kids and my wife to the park, and the phone rang, and it was a woman from the news, and she says to me, "Hi, how do you feel like you might be going to The Hague?" What? I was like, I don't know what you're on about. You got the wrong number. She says, "This Joseph McCleary." I was like, "Yeah, that's Joseph McCleary." She's like, "Yeah, your trials look like it's going to get reinvestigated, and you possibly could go to The Hague, and you have to be recalled to London." So I ended up giving me a name and address to the people in London who were doing the trial for me to go back to stand and do, like, it was called like a friendly. It was just stupid. And then I said to them, "I'm really going to struggle with this because I'm in mental health." And he said to me, "Just go and ring Health for Heroes. I'm sure you'll be fine." I said, "No, I don't think you understand. This nearly killed me last time. You're not doing it to me again." And yet I said to him, "I'm not coming. I don't want to come." And he went to me, "If you don't turn up, we'll go to the High Court, get a warrant and arrest you." Well, I said to him, "You just told me it was voluntary. 2 seconds ago, you said to me on the phone, it's voluntary, you don't have to turn up." I chose not to turn up. And looking back, and I always wish I'd said, "No, come and arrest me," because you shouldn't have done it to me. And yet, you dragged me back into that court. And then his, I can't think of the judge's name now, but he wrote a report sort of damning me. And I was like, because I was angry that, when he was asking me questions, I was always going to be angry. You know, this same judge sat in a room with me and said to me, I said to him, I tried to kill myself last time over this. Also, my friend Martin also tried to take his own life. Mm. And he went on, basically told me to button my lip up and just get on with it.
And this is 2016, so this is now rather,
This was, yeah. I mean, you described Joe's, the kind of climax of the court-martial in 2006. You used the phrase "silver lining," and it struck me then. It's like I'm kind of questioning. Obviously, Joe can answer whether we're at the silver lining yet, or we're kind of on the way. But it's, just from talking to Joe, I know that in the decade from 2006 to end of 2016. That was a decade in which a good portion of that Joe endured having to go through repeated investigations. First, the IHATS investigation, who couldn't find any further evidence. They then passed on the case to what was known as the IFI, the Iraq Fatalities Inquiry, and the judge from that in 2016, Sir George Newman, he was really critical of Joe, and at the time Joe's was just referred to in pseudonym, but the judge in his report called the incident a clumsy, ill-disciplined piece of conduct without consideration of the risk of harm, and then he went on to specifically say that he wasn't convinced by Joe's testimony, but actually, I know Joe particularly was, as he said, just didn't think that George Newman, Sir George, recognised what these soldiers had actually been through. And I was touched by when Joe, as he mentioned a moment ago, standing up for Martin when Sir George seemed to disregard the mental health struggles that Joe and Martin and potentially the others there had been through and were still going through, and that bringing these memories, these issues back up again, it was peeling up, it was reopening those wounds, and continued to have this effect of just exacerbating the kind of PTSD, and it's awful that they went through that.
Yeah, absolute disregard. And please tell me things are at least somewhat better in the UK now, at least the way things are spoken about.
Yeah, definitely. I have a friend who's an amputee, and he's a great lad. Went on to do massive things from Paralympian, and he said, you know what, Joe, should I feel sorry for it? Sometimes I feel like yours was the making for everybody else to get help. Do you know what I mean? He says to me, and we have conversations, and he says to me, I feel terrible. He said, and I said, you don't have to feel terrible. He said, if it wasn't for the people like you, then he had loads of help, and things are a lot better now for them, which is great, and so it should be. You put your life on the line for anybody, you should get what your rewards are, and and he's a cracking lad.
But you're also not asking for a reward. You're just asking for a bit of humanity in the way you treat it, but also just help to overcome the significant trauma. Have you had any compensation? Has there been any talk of? Because I know there's a court case that's ongoing at the moment.
We've got a legal action now. There's 30 different soldiers. So there's 30 different soldiers now, all getting represented by the same solicitor, Hilary Meredith, who's representing us, and she's been fighting this for a long time. So hopefully now, we'll get some type of maybe compensation, or, to be fair, I wouldn't mind. I would just love to sit there and ask him, the person who was in charge, why did you leave me, when I needed you the most? Why didn't you say to me, come on, son? People have this stigma around men where we just, you can't do it, like the suicide rate tonight, and I tell people now, me definitely, don't be afraid to speak out. Anyone, who's got issues with mental health, I'm a massive supporter, like I'm saying, just come on, open up. Let's sit down, let's talk it out, let's laugh, let's cry. Don't be ashamed. There's nothing at all to be ashamed about. If you're suffering, don't suffer in silence, because the last thing you want to do is end up where I was, and it's a really horrible, dark place. And if you take anything out to listening from this, and and anything you please and you feel like you've got a problem, then get in touch with someone, or even send me an email and I'll go and chat to you. You know, it made no difference to me.
And I congratulate you in saying that, because that's it does take people like yourself who've been through these horrors to speak up and normalize the fact that mental health is it's an injury, right? It's like it's like a broken arm that we can see, right? And you get a cast and it heals, but with mental health, we don't necessarily see those scars, and
we don't see them. This is the problem. You see, we don't see any of these things. These what people are hurting inside and crippled. I spoke to Will over for years, and in different locations. And sometimes I get really upset. And in this middle of this restaurant, I could feel myself, tears rolling off my face. But a lot of that was probably opening up. So it will probably help me just as much as, I help him.
Yeah.
Like it was great. I made a friend and I got loads off my chest, and, and it was like I'd come away from it, and it was like a little bit of releasing, made me feel a bit better, Yeah. And, Will's done a fantastic job on the book. Yeah. Amazing.
Absolutely. No, the book is a fantastic read, and I think it's important to as we're bringing this to a close, to just highlight, to reiterate that message about reaching out, because even though you've been through all of this, you've been through 4 suicide attempts, through a decade of being dragged through various investigations, courts. You are now back at work. You're married. You've got kids, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Of course, you've still got PTSD, but how is life now? I mean, is it? And this is maybe the silver lining part that I was prematurely referring to earlier.
I have a great family, an amazing wife. Well, sometimes you switch the ball off. It's like every wife, they always at me.
We're all going to be in trouble for this one. Yeah.
It's my fault, but, I have a great family, and I live for my family. That's what I do. I'm not a big fan of going out with the boys, or, nothing wrong with that, but I'm my own man now. Like I'm set like a lot, got my mortgage, my house. I go to work every day. Of course, I still look back and suffer, but I can deal with it now. I have mechanisms and my wife knows when I'm struggling. She knows when I wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning sweating, that she just calms me down, cup of tea, breathe it out, and just stuff like that. And then maybe talk it out. And I can promise you, anyone who is suffering from mental health, getting it off your chest is 100% better. Me speaking to Will, I came home feeling a lot better. And over the years, I probably passed it on to him, and then he just ended up suffering. So I don't know whether that was the case, but it worked for me, so that's okay. But no, if you can laugh and bring some kind of help to somebody, it's fantastic. I will always listen. I will always try and help someone else. I've been in that situation. I've been in the gutter.
Yeah.
It was lucky that I have a really strong family behind me, to pick me up and never let me go. Some people, especially people from the armed forces, come from broken families. They just joined because there was no other option for them. And, they didn't have that support. Them lads who have took their own lives. Every time I read it, it makes me cry. Sometimes you think, I wish I could have just got to him. I could have just spoke to him. A man 5 doors up from me here, killed himself, hung himself, and I had to pick him up and unhook him off the rope. On a Sunday morning, his family and kids were screaming. This is just a civilian.
No.
And it tortured me, the fact that I passed this gentleman all the time, and I never said to him. I used to say morning to him. I didn't know he struggled. He worked further down the road. And I always said to my wife, I wish I could have seen him. This was only like 2 years ago or a year ago. If I could have just got him at that point and to come in and have a cup of tea, mate.
Yeah.
Good old Matt and bang the world to rights.
Yeah.
And make him and help him with his struggles. But again, it was just another man who's gone and killed himself, and he had a family and a wife. But a silver lining anyway is, I am doing extremely well now, and I am a better person. I cope with my PTSD. I still suffer, but controlled. I have ways of doing it. You know, I have bad days, but, you know, I just take some time out, you know, and
one day at a time.
Yeah.
Congratulations,
probably just home and away. Watch a bit of Home and Away, watch a bit of Neighbours.
Oh, no, don't. Don't.
No,
He'll trigger you, mate. But maybe a last question for you, Will. How's the book been received so far? I mean, I know it's been only recently, it's only been 2 months or something it's been out, but how's it been received, firstly, by the general public, but also maybe more importantly, I don't know, by the military?
That's a good question. And there's a kind of, preamble to an answer. It's slightly tricky. This is my first book, slightly tricky putting a book out there during a aftermath of a pandemic when there's still loads of restrictions and, going out there and doing stuff is somewhat still,
of course,
restricted, but been trying to get the word out since the book's been launched. And it seems, roundly positive, which is nice. And really grateful for the team at Pen and Sword, the publishers. They're not a massive publishing house, but they're really strongly behind the book, and it's good to have it out there. Had some reviews back, and they've been really positive. I've had actually someone who was the company sergeant major for Joe during some of his time. He looked over the book, and it's actually before it was actually published, and he was really positive about it. And
who's that? Faculty?
May have been not naming any names, but
right, okay.
Not naming any names, but might have been.
Yeah. Well, listen, Pat will know. If he listens to this, I love you, Pat. He's a great fella. He was a great commissar major, brilliant fella.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and I truly believe if he would have known what was happening to me, he would have come and got me. Yeah. I just don't think he knew about it.
No. Gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure. We've just nearly clocked 2 hours recording. I'm speechless. Thank you both so much. This is certainly the first time I've done two guests at the same time. And I apologize if we, jumbled around a little bit, but I think, I thank you both for your patience with, trying to kind of juggle that. But I think the story is so powerful. And there are so many angles of that story that I was hoping to touch. So I really thank you for your time. And Will, congratulations again on that book. It's a really, really impactful read for me. And I'll certainly share it with my colleagues, and we'll put the link in the notes. And Joe, for you, mate, I take my hat off to you, mate. I'm absolutely blown away by your story. I'm blown away by your courage and your humility and your willingness to be vulnerable, which I think is hopefully a sign of things to come. With soldiers like yourself,
hopefully, yeah,
standing up and owning this space more so than those who seek to, I guess, suppress these voices, because we need to hear them, and those in the halls of power certainly need to hear them. And I echo your sentiment from before, Will. I think they need to be held accountable for some of these things as well. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know we've gone.
Thanks so much, Nick. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, gents.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us for another episode of The Voices of War. You can access all episodes on www.thevoicesofwar.com or by subscribing wherever you get your favourite podcasts. And while you're there, please give us a review, as we'd love to hear what you think. If you'd like to recommend a guest for the show, you can reach me on info@thevoicesofwar.com.